laughing in my sister-in-law's face when she DNA tested my daughter. I, 30M, have a daughter who's 6. I'm not biologically related to her at all. There is no blood relation between us. I was friends with her mother for most all of my childhood. We were never involved romantically and were always just friends. She had her daughter at 23 with her 25-year-old husband. When my daughter was a newborn, about 3 months technically, both her mother and father were killed. I won't go into too much detail for privacy reasons, but it was workplace shooting. My friend and her husband had worked in the same building and were both killed. The memories of that day still feel like a blur, even now after all these years. I remember getting the phone call from the police officer. His voice was steady and professional, but the words he spoke changed everything. Sarah and Michael were gone, just like that. Two people who had been so full of life, so excited about their new baby girl, were suddenly no longer part of this world. Sarah had been my best friend since we were 7 years old. We lived on the same street, went to the same schools, and shared countless adventures together. She was the kind of person who could make anyone laugh, even on their worst day. She had bright green eyes that sparkled when she smiled and curly red hair that she was always trying to tame. Everyone loved Sarah because she had this way of making people feel special and important. Michael came into our lives when we were in high school. He was new to town, and Sarah had a huge crush on him from the moment she saw him in chemistry class. I watched as she nervously approached him after school one day, asking if he needed help finding his way around. That was so typical of Sarah, always looking for ways to help others, even when she was really just trying to get closer to the boy she liked. Michael was tall and quiet, with dark hair and kind brown eyes. He was different from the other guys in our school. He actually listened when people talked, and he had this gentle way about him that made everyone feel comfortable. It took him a few weeks to realize that Sarah was interested in him, but once he did, they became inseparable. I watched their relationship grow from friendship to something deeper. They would study together in the school library, share their lunch in the cafeteria, and spend hours talking on the phone every night. Sarah would tell me about their conversations, how Michael wanted to be an engineer and help build things that would make people's lives better. She wanted to be a teacher and work with young children. After high school, Sarah and Michael both went to the same college. They got married right after graduation, and I was Michael's best man. Sarah looked absolutely beautiful in her wedding dress, and the happiness on both their faces was something I will never forget. They had found their perfect match in each other. 2 years later, Sarah called me with the most exciting news. She was pregnant. I could hear the joy in her voice as she told me about the baby. She and Michael had been trying for a while, and they were over the moon about becoming parents. Throughout her pregnancy, Sarah would send me pictures of her growing belly and tell me about all the plans they had for their little one. When Lily was born, Sarah and Michael were completely devoted to her. They would send me photos and videos almost every day. Lily had Sarah's bright green eyes and Michael's dark hair. She was the most beautiful baby I had ever seen, and it was clear that her parents were absolutely in love with her. I visited them often during those first few months. Sarah and Michael were tired but happy. They had transformed their spare bedroom into the most amazing nursery with soft yellow walls and a mobile with little stars that played gentle music. Michael had built the crib himself, sanding and painting it with such care. Sarah had sewn curtains and made little blankets, pouring her love into every stitch. Both my friend and her husband had grown up with less than ideal families and didn't have any siblings, so there wasn't any next of kin for their daughter to go to. However, because I was close with them, I was able to adopt her. Even though I had been iffy about the idea of kids, I didn't want their daughter to grow up in foster care or around people who didn't have a connection to her bio parents, so I stepped in. Sarah had often talked about her difficult childhood. Her parents had divorced when she was young, and neither of them had been particularly interested in being parents. She had bounced between relatives who saw her as a burden rather than a blessing. Michael's story was similar. His parents had struggled with addiction, and he had spent most of his teenage years taking care of himself. Because of their experiences, Sarah and Michael had made a decision early in their relationship. They wanted to create the loving, stable family that they had never had. They talked about having several children and giving them all the love and attention they had missed out on. They also talked about what would happen to their children if something ever happened to them. One evening, about a month after Lily was born, Sarah and Michael asked me to come over for dinner. After we had eaten, they sat me down for a serious conversation. They told me that they had been thinking about guardianship for Lily, and they wanted to ask if I would be willing to take care of her if anything ever happened to them. I was shocked by the question. At that time, I was 24 years old and had never really thought about having children of my own. The idea of being responsible for a tiny human being seemed overwhelming, but as I looked at Sarah and Michael, and then at little Lily sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, I knew what my answer had to be. Of course, I told them. I would be honored to take care of her if you ever need me to. Sarah started crying, and Michael reached over to shake my hand. They told me that knowing Lily would be safe with someone who loved her parents gave them incredible peace of mind. We talked about practical things like legal documents and what they would want for Lily's upbringing. They made me promise that I would tell her about them, that I would make sure she knew how much they loved her. I never imagined that conversation would become so important just 2 months later. The day of the shooting, I was at work when I got the call. The police officer told me that there had been an incident at the office building where Sarah and Michael worked. He said that there had been multiple casualties, and that Sarah and Michael were among those who had been killed. I remember dropping the phone and just staring at the wall for what felt like hours. The next few days were a blur of funeral arrangements, legal meetings, and trying to process the fact that two of the most important people in my life were gone. Through it all, I kept thinking about Lily. She was only 3 months old, and she had no idea that her whole world had changed. The process of adopting Lily was complicated, but Sarah and Michael had made sure that all the legal paperwork was in order. They had named me as Lily's guardian in their will, and they had made their wishes very clear. Even so, there were social workers to meet with, court hearings to attend, and mountains of paperwork to fill out. During this time, Lily stayed with me. I had never taken care of a baby before, and I was terrified that I would do something wrong. But somehow, we figured it out together. I learned how to change diapers, how to prepare bottles, and how to rock her to sleep when she was fussy. Every day, I would look at her little face and see Sarah and Michael looking back at me. My parents and siblings know that my daughter is not my actual daughter biologically speaking. My daughter, I'll call Lily for the post, also knows that she's adopted. I never really hid the fact that she was adopted. She knows her parents are dead and were killed by a bad man, but I'm saving the details for when she's older. From the very beginning, I made the decision to be completely honest with Lily about her adoption. I had read many books and talked to counselors about the best way to handle this situation. Everyone agreed that honesty, presented in an age-appropriate way, was the best approach. My parents were incredibly supportive when I told them about my decision to adopt Lily. My mother, who had always dreamed of having grandchildren, immediately embraced Lily as her own grandchild. My father, who could be gruff and distant at times, melted the moment he held Lily in his arms. My younger brother and sister were both excited about having a niece, and they stepped up to help me in ways I never expected. Those first few months were incredibly challenging. I had to learn everything about caring for a baby while also dealing with my own grief over losing Sarah and Michael. There were nights when Lily would cry for hours, and I would walk around my apartment, bouncing her gently and singing the lullabies that Sarah used to sing to her. I kept a photo of Sarah and Michael on Lily's dresser, and I would tell her stories about her mommy and daddy every night before bed. As Lily grew older, she began to ask questions about the people in the photos. I started by telling her simple stories about her mommy and daddy, how much they loved her, and how they had to go to heaven when she was very little. I explained that they had asked me to take care of her because they knew how much I loved her too. When Lily was about 3 years old, she asked me why she did not live with her mommy and daddy like other kids did. I sat her down and explained that sometimes very sad things happen, and that her mommy and daddy had been hurt by a bad man who did not know how to be kind. I told her that they were watching over her from heaven, and that they would always love her. Lily listened very carefully to everything I told her. She was a smart little girl, and she seemed to understand that her situation was different from other children. She would sometimes ask if her mommy and daddy missed her, and I would tell her that they missed her very much, but that they were happy knowing that she was safe and loved. As the years passed, Lily and I developed our own traditions and routines. Every year on her birthday, we would visit Sarah and Michael's graves and leave flowers. We would tell them about all the things Lily had learned and accomplished during the year. On holidays, we would look through photo albums together, and I would tell her more stories about her parents. Lily does not look like me at all. She looks exactly like her mother and biological dad. Most people assume that I'm her bio dad and that she just took after her mom. I don't ever really correct this when and if people assume this because it just seems unnecessary. Lily inherited Sarah's bright green eyes and her infectious smile. She also got Sarah's curly red hair, which she loves to wear in pigtails or braids. From Michael, she inherited his gentle nature and his curiosity about how things work. She was always asking questions about everything around her, just like her biological father used to do. People would often comment on how much Lily looked like her mother, assuming that I was talking about some woman they had never met. When they would say things like, "She has your eyes," or "She definitely gets her personality from you," I would just smile and nod. It seemed easier than explaining the whole complicated story, especially to people who were just making casual conversation. At the grocery store, the park, or at school events, people would make assumptions about our family. They would talk about how nice it was to see a single father raising his daughter, or they would ask about Lily's mother. I learned to give simple, honest answers without going into too much detail. I would say things like, "Her mother is not with us anymore," or "It's just the two of us now." The teachers at Lily's school knew our story because I had explained it to them when I enrolled her. They were always very supportive and understanding. They made sure that Lily felt included in all the activities, even when they involved making cards or gifts for both parents. They would help her make special cards for her mommy and daddy in heaven, or they would let her make an extra card for me. Lily seemed to handle the questions from other children very well. When kids would ask about her mommy and daddy, she would explain that they were in heaven, but that she lived with me and I took care of her. She was never embarrassed or upset about her situation. If anything, she seemed proud of our little family and the special bond we shared. Our daily routine was built around making sure Lily felt secure and loved. Every morning, I would wake her up with a song and help her get ready for school. We would eat breakfast together, and I would ask her about her plans for the day. After school, we would do her homework together, and then she would tell me about everything that had happened. In the evenings, we would cook dinner together. Lily loved to help me prepare meals, and she was getting quite good at measuring ingredients and stirring pots. After dinner, we would read books together or work on puzzles. Before bed, we would always spend a few minutes talking about her mommy and daddy, and I would tell her how proud they would be of the wonderful little girl she was becoming. Weekends were our special time together. We would go to the park, visit the library, or explore new places around town. Lily loved going to the zoo and the children's museum. She was fascinated by animals and was always asking questions about different creatures and their habitats. She also loved art projects and would spend hours drawing pictures and making crafts. My family had fully embraced Lily as one of our own. My parents treated her exactly like they treated their biological grandchildren. They would take her shopping, have her over for sleepovers, and spoil her with toys and treats. My siblings included her in all family activities and never made her feel like an outsider. During family gatherings, Lily would play with her cousins and participate in all the family traditions. She had her own stocking at Christmas, her own special spot at the dinner table, and her own collection of family photos. To anyone looking at our family, Lily belonged completely and naturally. However, there was one person who had never quite understood our family dynamic, and that was my brother's fiancée. She had joined our family relatively recently, and she had never taken the time to really understand Lily's story or our relationship. My brother has been with his fiancée for about 2 years now. A few weeks ago, we were all meeting up at my parents' house, and my SIL saw an old picture of me, my friend, and her husband. She pointed to my friend and asked who she was, and I explained that was Lily's mother. SIL got quiet and stood in front of the picture for a while. I didn't think much of it. To clarify, she knows my friend died, but I guess didn't know that she had been married, or that Lily is not my bio daughter. I suppose she assumed my daughter was mine and my friend's biological daughter. My brother had met his fiancée, Jessica, at his workplace about 2.5 years ago. She was new to the company and had recently moved to our town from across the country. Jessica was attractive and seemed pleasant enough, but from the beginning, I noticed that she had a tendency to be nosy about family matters that did not really concern her. When my brother first started bringing Jessica around to family events, she would ask a lot of questions about everyone's personal lives. She wanted to know about past relationships, family history, and details about things that most people would consider private. My parents were polite but somewhat uncomfortable with her curiosity, and my sister had mentioned to me that Jessica seemed to be gathering information rather than just making conversation. Jessica had met Lily several times at family gatherings, and she had always been nice enough to her. However, I noticed that she would sometimes make comments that seemed a bit inappropriate. She would say things like, "It must be hard being a single father," or "Lily is lucky to have you step up like that." These comments always made me uncomfortable because they seemed to imply that I was doing something extraordinary rather than just being a loving parent. The day of the incident started like any other family gathering. We were all meeting at my parents' house for Sunday dinner, which was a tradition we had maintained for years. My mother had prepared a big meal and everyone was in good spirits. Lily was playing with her cousins in the backyard, and the adults were catching up on each other's lives. After dinner, we were all sitting in the living room, and Jessica was looking around at the family photos that covered the walls and side tables. My mother had always loved displaying pictures of family members, and there were photos from various time periods throughout our lives. Jessica seemed particularly interested in the older photos, picking them up and asking questions about who was in each picture. She picked up a photo that had been taken about 7 years ago before Sarah and Michael had died. It was a picture of the three of us at a barbecue, all smiling and laughing. Sarah was holding baby Lily and Michael had his arm around Sarah's shoulders. I was standing next to them and we all looked so happy and carefree. Jessica pointed to Sarah and asked who she was. I explained that was Lily's mother. The moment I said those words, I could see something change in Jessica's expression. She got very quiet and continued staring at the photo as if she was trying to solve some kind of puzzle. I noticed that she kept glancing between the photo and me and then looking over at Lily, who was playing nearby. She seemed to be studying our faces, comparing features and looking for similarities. I found her behavior a bit odd, but I didn't think too much about it at the time. Jessica stood in front of that photo for what felt like a very long time. She was completely silent, just staring at Sarah's face with an expression that I couldn't quite read. Other family members were engaged in their own conversations, so no one else seemed to notice what was happening. Finally, Jessica put the photo down and rejoined the conversation, but I could tell that something was bothering her. She seemed distracted for the rest of the evening, and she kept looking at Lily with a strange expression. When it was time to leave, she was unusually quiet and didn't participate in the usual goodbye hugs and conversations. Over the next few days, I noticed that Jessica was asking my brother a lot of questions about our family history. My brother mentioned to me that she had been particularly interested in learning more about Lily's background and how she had come to live with me. He said that Jessica seemed confused about some of the details, but he had not thought much about it. I was busy with work and taking care of Lily, so I did not give Jessica's behavior much thought. Lily had started first grade that year, and I was focused on helping her adjust to her new school and making sure she was happy and comfortable. We had developed a good routine, and everything in our lives was going smoothly. About a week after the family dinner, I noticed that Jessica had been spending more time at my parents' house when I was not there. My mother mentioned that she had stopped by a few times to look at family photos and ask questions about family history. My mother, who was always happy to share family stories, had been more than willing to provide information. It was during one of these visits that Jessica had asked my mother more detailed questions about Lily's adoption. My mother, not thinking there was anything wrong with sharing the information, had explained the whole story about Sarah and Michael's death and how I had adopted Lily. She had also mentioned that Sarah had been married to Michael and that they had both been killed in the same incident. I later learned that this information had been very surprising to Jessica. She had apparently assumed that Lily was my biological daughter with Sarah, and that Sarah had been an ex-girlfriend or former partner who had died. The revelation that Sarah had been married to someone else and that I had no biological connection to Lily had been completely unexpected. Jessica's behavior became increasingly strange over the following weeks. She would make comments about genetics and family resemblances, and she seemed to be studying Lily's appearance very carefully. She would say things like, "It's interesting how children can look so much like one parent and nothing like the other," or "I've always been fascinated by how traits are passed down through families." My brother noticed that Jessica had become somewhat obsessed with the topic of family genetics. She had started watching documentaries about DNA and heredity, and she had even mentioned that she was thinking about getting a DNA test done to learn more about her own family background. None of us realized at the time that Jessica was planning something that would completely disrupt our family's peace and happiness. She had become convinced that there was some kind of secret or deception involved in Lily's parentage, and she had decided to take matters into her own hands. The planning and execution of what happened next showed a level of sneakiness and dishonesty that none of us had expected from someone who was supposed to become a member of our family. Jessica had clearly been thinking about this for weeks, and she had been collecting the materials she needed to carry out her plan. What made her actions even more troubling was that she had involved my innocent 6-year-old daughter in her scheme. Lily had no idea what was happening, and she had no way to protect herself from the situation that Jessica was creating. Looking back, I should have recognized the warning signs of Jessica's behavior. Her excessive curiosity, her strange comments about genetics, and her sudden interest in our family history should have alerted me to the fact that she was planning something inappropriate. But I had been focused on my own life and responsibilities, and I had not imagined that anyone would go to such lengths to interfere in our family's private affairs. My SIL got a DNA test done on my daughter behind my back. She used my brother's DNA for the test, and when it came back that they weren't related, she knew that meant me and Lily weren't related. She came up to me with the results and waved them in my face, saying that I was taking care of a dead woman's affair baby. She said this to me in front of my daughter. I just stared at her for a while before bursting out laughing at this. The day Jessica decided to confront me with her DNA test results was a Saturday afternoon. Lily and I had been at my parents' house for our usual weekend visit. We had spent the morning working in my mother's garden, and Lily had been helping my father fix a broken fence in the backyard. It was a peaceful, ordinary day until Jessica arrived. Jessica showed up at my parents' house around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. She seemed nervous and excited at the same time, and she was carrying a manila envelope in her hand. She greeted everyone politely, but I could tell that she was focused on something specific. She kept looking at me with an expression that seemed almost triumphant. My brother was not with her, which was unusual because they typically came to family gatherings together. When my mother asked where he was, Jessica said that he was at home working on a project, but that she had something important to discuss with the family. The way she said it made everyone a bit uncomfortable, and I could see my parents exchanging worried glances. Lily was playing in the living room with some toys, completely unaware of the tension that was building among the adults. She was in her own little world, creating elaborate stories with her dolls and blocks. She looked so innocent and happy, and I felt a surge of protectiveness as I watched her play. Jessica sat down on the couch and placed the envelope on the coffee table in front of her. She was clearly trying to build suspense, and she kept looking around the room as if she was preparing to make some kind of announcement. My parents and I were all watching her, waiting to see what she was going to say. Finally, Jessica opened the envelope and pulled out several sheets of paper. I could see that they were some kind of official documents, with charts and numbers that I could not read from where I was sitting. Jessica's hands were shaking slightly as she held the papers, and her voice was trembling with excitement. "I have something very important to share with all of you," she said, looking directly at me. "I have discovered something that I think everyone needs to know about." My mother asked what she was talking about, and Jessica explained that she had been doing some research into our family's genetics. She said that she had been curious about heredity and family traits, and that she had decided to get some DNA testing done to learn more about our family connections. At this point, I was beginning to feel very uneasy about where this conversation was heading. I could see that Jessica was building up to something dramatic, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever she was about to reveal was going to be hurtful and inappropriate. Jessica stood up and walked over to where I was sitting. She held the papers in front of my face and started explaining what they showed. She had somehow obtained a sample of my brother's DNA, and she had also obtained a sample of Lily's DNA. She had submitted both samples to a DNA testing company, and the results had come back showing that my brother and Lily were not related. As she was explaining this, I felt a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief. I could not believe that someone would go behind my back and secretly test my daughter's DNA without my permission. I was also confused about how she had obtained the samples, and I was furious that she had involved my innocent child in her scheme. Jessica seemed to be enjoying the moment, and she continued talking about the implications of the DNA test results. She said that if my brother and Lily were not related, then that meant that I and Lily were not related either. She seemed to think that she had discovered some kind of family secret that had been hidden from everyone. Then Jessica said the words that I will never forget. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, "You are taking care of a dead woman's affair baby." She said this loudly enough for everyone in the room to hear, including Lily, who was still playing nearby. The moment those words left Jessica's mouth, I felt like the world had stopped spinning. I could not believe that someone would say something so cruel and inappropriate, especially in front of my daughter. I looked over at Lily, who had stopped playing and was looking at us with a confused expression on her face. For several seconds, I just stared at Jessica in complete shock. I could not process what had just happened or figure out how to respond. Part of me wanted to be angry, part of me wanted to be hurt, and part of me wanted to explain the situation. but mostly I just felt stunned by the sheer audacity of what she had done. Then suddenly I started laughing. It was not the kind of laughter that comes from finding something funny. It was the kind of laughter that comes from being so shocked and bewildered by a situation that you do not know how else to respond. I laughed harder and harder until I was almost crying. I told her I knew Lily wasn't my biological daughter and that this thing called adoption exists. Her face went red and she stormed off. My brother is mad I embarrassed his fiancée, but I said she embarrassed herself by DNA testing a kid that isn't hers and then parading the results up to me. What did she want me to do? What was her goal with this? Did she want me to break down and abandon my daughter? My brother said she thought she was doing the right thing and called me an asshole. I don't feel like the asshole, especially considering my SIL was the one who stuck her nose where it doesn't belong. When I finally stopped laughing, I looked at Jessica and explained the situation to her. I told her that I had always known that Lily was not my biological daughter and that I had adopted her after her parents were killed. I explained that adoption is a legal process where people choose to become parents to children who are not biologically related to them. Jessica's face turned bright red as she realized that her big revelation was actually no revelation at all. She had spent weeks planning this confrontation, and she had been so sure that she was exposing some kind of family secret. Instead, she had simply demonstrated her own ignorance about our family's situation. I could see that Jessica was embarrassed and angry, but instead of apologizing for her inappropriate behavior, she became defensive. She started arguing that she had been trying to help and that she thought I deserved to know the truth about Lily's parentage. She seemed to believe that she had been doing some kind of noble service by exposing what she thought was deception. My parents were absolutely horrified by Jessica's behavior. My mother immediately went over to comfort Lily, who was clearly upset by the raised voices and tense atmosphere. My father stood up and asked Jessica to leave the house, telling her that her behavior was completely unacceptable. Jessica gathered up her DNA test results and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. The whole room was silent for several minutes after she left, and I could see that everyone was trying to process what had just happened. My brother arrived at my parents' house about an hour later, and he was furious with me for embarrassing his fiancée. He said that Jessica had called him crying and that she was upset about how I had reacted to her revelation. He seemed to think that I should have been more grateful for the information she had provided. I explained to my brother that Jessica had secretly obtained DNA samples from both him and Lily without anyone's permission. I pointed out that she had then used those samples to conduct unauthorized genetic testing on my daughter. I also emphasized that she had made her accusations in front of Lily, who was only 6 years old and did not need to hear such inappropriate comments. My brother argued that Jessica had been trying to do the right thing and that she had thought she was helping me by revealing the truth about Lily's parentage. He seemed to believe that Jessica's intentions had been good, even if her methods had been questionable. I told my brother that Jessica's actions had been completely inappropriate and that her intentions did not excuse her behavior. I pointed out that she had violated my privacy and my daughter's privacy by conducting unauthorized genetic testing. I also emphasized that she had made hurtful and inappropriate comments about my daughter in front of the child herself. The argument with my brother continued for quite a while, with both of us becoming increasingly frustrated with each other's perspectives. He seemed to think that I was being too harsh in my judgment of Jessica's actions, while I felt that he was not taking the situation seriously enough. Eventually, my parents intervened and asked us to stop arguing in front of Lily. They pointed out that the most important thing was to make sure that Lily was okay and that she understood that she was loved and wanted by our entire family. Later that evening, after my brother had left, I sat down with Lily to talk about what had happened. I could see that she was confused and upset by the afternoon's events, and I wanted to make sure that she understood that nothing had changed about our family or our relationship. I explained to Lily that Jessica had been confused about our family and that she had said some things that were not very nice. I told her that some people do not understand adoption and that they sometimes say things that can be hurtful without meaning to be mean. Lily asked me if what Jessica had said was true, and I told her that it was true that we were not related by blood, but that it was not true that this made our family any less real or important. I explained that families are made by love and choice, not just by genetics. I also told Lily that her mommy and daddy in heaven had chosen me to take care of her because they knew how much I loved her. I explained that this made our family special and important, and that nothing anyone said could change that. Lily seemed to understand what I was telling her, and she asked if she could see the photo of her mommy and daddy. We looked at the picture together, and I told her again about how much her biological parents had loved her and how happy they would be to see what a wonderful little girl she had become. Over the following weeks, my brother and I continued to have difficult conversations about Jessica's behavior. He eventually began to understand that what she had done was inappropriate, but he still felt that I had been too harsh in my response to her actions. Jessica never apologized for her behavior, and she continued to maintain that she had been trying to help. She seemed to believe that her intentions justified her actions, regardless of how much harm she had caused. The incident caused a significant strain in our family relationships, and it took several months for things to return to normal. However, it also served as a reminder of how strong and loving our family really was, and how nothing could change the bonds that we had created through years of love and commitment. Today, Lily is a happy and confident little girl who knows that she is loved unconditionally by her entire family. She understands her adoption story, and she is proud of the special way that our family was created. The incident with Jessica was painful and inappropriate, but it ultimately made our family stronger and more united.